And we're live. The Department of Justice could soon decide the fate of the AT&T and Time Warner acquisition. Google pulls YouTube off of Amazon devices again. Will the Huawei P11 have a 40 megapixel triple rear camera? And we've got the full scoop on Qualcomm's upcoming Snapdragon 845 chipset. We've got a lot to talk about, so make sure you're charged and ready for episode 282 of the Pocketnow Weekly. Recorded December 8th at noon Pacific, this weekly podcast is where we dissect and discuss those gadgets that make our lives mobile. Smartphones, tablets, and wearables. It's all the stuff you wished existed when you were a kid, and business news like corporate acquisitions were super boring. I'm Juan Carlos Bagnell, senior editor at Pocketnow.com, joined as always by plucky podcast producer Mr. Jules Wong on the East Coast. How's it going, buddy boy?
Well, I guess if I were 20 years younger, I would have treated net neutrality with the same kind of weight.
Yet I kind of feel like it's those younger members of our audience and younger generation that are probably way more tuned in and tapped into this kind of stuff today than I was when I was their age.
They are driving the conversation, as like all the sites that they go to are telling them, "Hey, this is bad." You got them to sign up, to call their Congress people, and just get riled up. So, I mean, it's an issue in this development of what we call the World Wide Web. It's kind of important. Hello.
We've spent some time talking about it. I also just recently I guested on Adam Dowd's podcast, Techbeard.
Yay.
And he produced a whole episode on net neutrality, and then a friend of mine snaked my delegate position. I actually put in my paperwork to be a Bernie delegate for the 2016 election.
Ooh.
But I'm friends with Mr. Dan Gordon. I just recently shared on my Facebook page a video he produced on net neutrality. We're coming up on that vote, and we're not going to dedicate time in this episode to talking about it. Like I said, we've covered it in past podcasts, but
yeah,
definitely.
And the vote's coming up next week. Maybe we'll talk about it next week. But until then, we want to hear from you.
About how the
today.
Vote comes out. Definitely.
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll talk about it with you, the viewer, the listener that is participating in the show today. We're live right now at 3 p.m. Eastern, and if you want to get in on the conversation that we're having today, just go to Twitter and hit up and weekly, and you'll be able to find all the comments that are going around what we're talking about. Got a whole slate of topics, including Qualcomm. That's going to be interesting. We're talking about the next flagships for 2018 and even part of 2019 too. So let's move on over to the emails too. We also have that. I forgot about. And when it comes to those, you can send them along. And talk to us that way too. We do a mailbag episode every end of the month, and to get to our email, you can do so at podcast@pocketnow.com. So podcast@pocketnow.com, hashtag PN Weekly. Apparently, to my live audience, it sounds like I'm a little bit lower today. I'm a very, very deepening. I think I've actually taken like a lozenge or something to make this happen.
Well, I mean, you just got that new super bassy mic. You know, you're using the "make me sound good" filter on your audio recording gear, right?
Apparently, it's just one magic button. It's like, boom.
Who knew? All this time, that was our problem. We just needed the magic "sound good" filter, and now everything is perfect.
And now I sound like Mr. Robot.
Yay! And we just got a tweet using the PN Weekly hashtag from Andrew Wallace. Wow, plot twist. Jules, your voice is super deep today. I'm going to be a little scratchy voice today because in the valley, we're well surrounded by all the fires.
All the smoke. Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was.
Pretty amazing stuff.
So
I think this mic is also telling me that the latency or the speed of which I'm talking is going to be pretty slow today.
Yeah, again, well, we finally got you upgraded on a better recording equipment, but apparently, just like anything else audio related to our show, Google Hangouts is going to flip out. So let's jump into some news. Let's actually kick this puppy off and see what we've got to talk about this week.
All right, let's see if we can make this bearable here for the week of December 3, 2017. This is all the news that is fit to podcast. Maybe I should compensate by going up a little bit. The date for the trial. No,
No,
I'm
don't
sorry.
do that. Don't do that.
The trial against AT&T has been set. The Justice Department will make its antitrust case against the telecom on March 19 over concerns that an $85 billion acquisition of Time Warner would hurt the content and distribution marketplaces in the U.S. Time Warner owned CNN has been a contentious piece in this matter as President Trump has criticized its fake news coverage throughout his campaign. It was also supposedly a marketing chip behind the scenes as the Justice Department was trying to rein in some scrutiny on the deal. 300 units of the LG V30 Signature Edition are on sale in Korea for a whopping $1,800 equivalent US. The phone takes off from the glossy finish of the regular V30 with ceramic and bumps up the memory to 6 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage. The HTC Harmony device that has been in the rumor mill for some time is being reported out by Evan Blass, HTC U11 Eyes. That's EYES. The 2014 HTC Desire iPhone, the first in its portfolio, was one that put an emphasis on selfies. It's not clear if we'll see this carry the same weight, and we might say this in the same time frame that the HTC U Ultra came in this year. That would be early in the year. The Huawei PCE is also being reported out by Blass, rumored to bring about 3 rear cameras with 24 megapixel selfies, 5 times hybrid zoom, and 40 megapixel pictures, all of this in conjunction with Leica technology. We'll get into more of that in just a little bit. The Galaxy S9, according to an inside source at Samsung, will not be making an appearance at CES 2018. It had been rumored for a while. This is in contention with a whole other slew of announcements expected from Huawei and from Lenovo as well. So there could have been some mounting pressure. Apparently, some design issues with the fingerprint sensor could still be holding back the actual showcase of the design of the phone. Google is pulling off YouTube from all of Amazon's devices, including the Echo Show and the Fire TV, over retaliation that the Amazon is not selling Nest products, as well as delivering on its Prime Video service on Google's services. Co-founder of Vine, Dom Hoffman, is also now tweeting about a new Vine. The 6-second social video sharing service was killed off earlier this year by Twitter, which had acquired it in 2013. There's talk now that this side project of Hoffman is going to be coming soon. So with all that going about, let's start with AT&T, Time Warner, and why this has to go through. Because we're talking about a content distributor, AT&T, with its pipes, wire lines, and wireless mediums. And then there's Time Warner with CNN, Cartoon Network, all the other kinds of media channels that it provides. This would be a vertical integration. This ends maybe like half a century or so since the government has come down on a vertical integration like this. Talk to me about what's going on with the Trump factor here with CNN and how this all relates.
Yeah, this has definitely become one of the more politicized stories involving major corporations acquiring other major corporations. In part, we just recently saw the FCC whittle back protections on buying up media outlets. This is a law that's been on the books for 42 years as to, what policy and what media companies a single company can own in any given area. And it's interesting that from a conservative standpoint, typically this kind of thing would be supported, but it's been caught up in a lot of presidential news. Donald Trump regularly pointing to outlets like CNN as fake news. And so there is a sort of a mounting discussion on whether or not the president's influence over this is extending into the Department of Justice. So when we're talking about if you're concerned about media conglomerates becoming bigger media conglomerates, I think there are a number of people who were concerned about AT&T blurring the lines between a telecommunication service and an information service by providing both the pipes to content and the content that is supposed to flow on those pipes. But right now, it seems like this merger could be held up, so long as there's some stipulation that AT&T or Time Warner sell off CNN before dumping their catalog on AT&T's network.
Yeah. So with all those considerations, Fox might want to consider buying it, and we know that Rupert Murdoch has been wanting to continue to bolster his media properties around the world, including in Australia. But especially this case here, where right wing supporter ever since the Reagan days, and now it's just he's been shifting around a whole bunch of other opportunities with his cinematic properties of 21st Century Fox, trying to make sure that there's a talk that Disney might be able to buy up properties such as X-Men and all the other studios and cameras and equipment like that. So lots of agendas swirling around here. I just wanted to hit on this quickly so that we knew what was going on with
Yeah, I'm sure this is also going to be a story that we continue to see evolve. I mean, you bringing up Disney and Fox, I mean, I think that's a perfect example of just how many mega IPs are being, sort of hot potatoed around from company to company. And it seems like, at least as it pertains to AT&T's involvement with Time Warner, that we should be getting, I think, some sort of summary or final judgment March of next year. So we're in a period now of, I think, more debate and people joining the public conversation how we're going to handle sort of future acquisitions like this. But at some point, they're eventually just going to have to say this is the answer, yes or no, and we'll see if AT&T and Time Warner are able to satisfy the current administration. That comes down in March.
And all this comes to a point where we've been seeing unlimited data come into play at the carriers, and faster network technologies come in, and they want to side like they have been with cable channels. They just want to load in as much media as possible, gobbling all these properties. So yeah, this has end impacts for every single person that has a cell phone out there. So
Right.
we have lots of time to go through that. Again, March 19 is when the trial starts, and we don't expect that to end until maybe May or so. And AT&T and Time Warner are the deal. They'll stick it out, even with like a $500 million fee if the deal doesn't get closed at this date. But
Right, yeah, like a $500 million to multi-billion-dollar companies. I mean,
yeah.
that's not even like a blink, that they're not going to be too upset about that. But what's more fun than this Time Warner acquisition is talking about a phone that is amazing for consuming content. And one that I think it's an interesting move. This is something that I've actually wanted to see more companies doing, is putting out
Ceramic.
limited edition. No, not ceramic. I mean, not ceramic specifically, but why not have a limited edition version of a phone? I mean, we've seen it occasionally, like Olympics editions or the Batman version of the Galaxy S7. I think this kind of stuff is fun, and if any company we're going to shake up the look of their products, I think LG is definitely in line for doing something outlandish, even if it's just to garner some headlines.
We always talk about these OEMs and what kind of audience they want to tailor. OnePlus has always been catering to the tech enthusiast, and they've kind of been stuck in that rut. They've been trying to transition out of that for a while, whereas mainstream LG, Samsung, Apple, they have their kind of main meat and potatoes that they can set out there for the masses. And then for their side interests, Apple has Product Red, Samsung, of course, those media franchises, and here LG just wants to treat its super fans. I'm not sure if they could have done anything a little bit different to spice it up with a media franchise or a cause or something like that, but just this 300 units Korea, their home market, and $1,800 for, I would say, marginal improvements with the 6 gigs of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage. I mean, that's kind of just kind of $100 kind of upgrade deal that you would want anyways. I
Well,
mean,
but this is also this also falls in line though with the same argument that Essential was trying to make. You know, it building a phone out of a more expensive material isn't something that I think general consumers really gravitate towards. It seems many people are fine buying brittle glass on the back of their phones and not engaging in any kind of different conversation or acting like it's some kind of downgrade if your phone is made out of something not shiny and flashy, right? You know, like Kevlar would be a premium material, carbon fiber would be a premium material to build your phone with, but you can't really have that conversation on a flagship because then everyone gets their undies in a twist. This is, I think, exactly the right way to do it. You have a limited set of devices, 300 devices. Um, Manufacturing and machining only 300 phones to be put out as premium. You know, that also affects the price, but you're not doing this because you're trying to get your bang for buck. You're doing this because it's supposed to be exclusive and something kind of gaudy or something kind of extreme for that commentary. You pull out your phone as this is a $2,000 smartphone because I'm worth it. So
right.
you know you do at least get some marginal spec bumps. This isn't like a Vertu where they use a Qualcomm 400 series processor, but they cover it in Swarovski crystals. This is actual, you know, an actual durability upgrade, an actual premium material upgrade, a couple little spec bumps, but you get the conversation topic, you get the conversation point of saying your phone is super exclusive. So it's not, I don't think this is the same argument that we would make with a Galaxy Note 8 being almost $1,000 or an iPhone 10 being over $1,000 in many markets. This is a completely different animal. This is trying to do
No,
a
no,
good version of what Vertu used to do back in the day.
this is the animal that's screaming, "Help LG Mobile get out of its deficits," is what I'm seeing here. But I
Well,
mean,
but I
to
mean,
each
like
their own.
Huawei does the same thing with Porsche design, right? The Porsche designed phones. You like
Like, as
you have an
nature,
argument to be made by releasing an ultra premium variant, which doesn't make general consumers feel like they got shafted, right?
but
So
at least they
that's
have,
a very delicate balance to walk.
there's a whole weight to it. There because Porsche design, they're known for designing their cars to be streamlined and yet sassy enough to bring the personality when you're going from 0 to 60. And there's Pantone too. They're supposed to know all the colors in the world and even make up new ones when you think that they've got like the billion DFQ that they have out there. They have purple out as their color of the year this year. I hope they have a purple phone out. Huawei, hello. And so this, I feel like could have used a little bit more firepower, or if not, just less
No,
exclusivity.
I think this is actually the right way to play it. I think, you know, trying to make people feel like their regular phones are somehow less desirable is a huge mistake, especially for a company in LG's position right now. So you come out with something ridiculously over the top and then you batter people with advertising on that. That would be a huge misstep. So I think it's quiet, it's subtle, it's refined, it's sophisticated. It's the LG Signature Edition limited edition phone, and it's not so much better or so much different than the standard phone that the people who own V30s or G6s aren't going to feel like, oh, well, now you're just making an obscene cash grab and making my phone worse just so you can put out this better phone for rich people. This actually goes to a comment in the from Twitter using the PAN Weekly hashtag from @FatProduce. You think LG is maybe testing the waters of different materials and losing as little investment as possible with this move. So maybe a future V series phone might be made out of ceramic instead of glass, but this is how you start that machining and manufacturing process. You kind of dip your toe in the water, you see what people are willing to pay for it, and then you also get the experience of working with this material. I think this is the right way to do something silly and outlandish.
Well, I've been bringing up Huawei, and speaking of silly and ridiculous and outlandish, um, yeah, three cameras, 40 megapixels. Um, what?
And we're all over the place on this story. There are several different theories, hypotheses as to what Huawei might be doing with this kind of marketing here. Saying you get a 40 megapixel image doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming from a 40 megapixel camera.
Yeah,
I
because we've seen
don't
this before
believe.
with Asus and OnePlus pixel compositing from
Yeah,
even just one camera.
numerous phones will do this like super scaling, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. So what I'd be curious to see is if we get a triple sensor rear back phone, what the relationship between those sensors will be. And I'm willing to bet that there is probably going to be a matched 12 and 20, similar to the current Huawei Leica cameras that we have now, and then some kind of different focal length if they go ultra wide or if they go with the zoom sensor, but that all three of these cameras would work together. So I could imagine, so
Yeah,
imagine
that
like
is
a
what
Huawei.
hybrid zoom language right there.
Totally. So imagine a Huawei with an ultra wide, maybe even if it's just like an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera sensor, but the image detailing is composited with the normal focal length so that the center of your ultra wide sensor of your ultra wide shot is super super clear, very very detailed, very crispy. That's something that Huawei already does a very good job with in enhancing clarity, texture, contrast. That's what those two cameras work well together. Or by contrast, let's say you had a zoom sensor as that third camera sensor, you could still draw on the depth information and the clarity and detail information for low light shots. So you wouldn't sacrifice that performance like you do on an iPhone or a Galaxy with that zoom sensor, where they don't even use the zoom sensor when you're trying to shoot at night with that smaller sensor. They just give up. They just go back to the main camera sensor. So
Well,
I
you know
could
what
see some potential for some flexibility in that system. And then it's all just an exercise in computational photography and computational post processing to merge the output from these three different sensors so that you get something really interesting in that Leica processing.
which in association with Leica, I know they're not the ones that are doing all the maths to make this happen, but this is probably as high tech as Leica gets around these parts because they're more known for these individually for these old school kind of things, and that kind of brings me to what I'm preemptively disappointed about, which is the lack of 3D scanning that we might do on the rear camera if we're going to go into the augmented reality or virtual reality age going forward. You just want to see that. And I know that
Um,
Huawei has been gunning for Samsung and Apple for this front, and I feel like this was a missed opportunity for them at least.
well, potentially. See, this is also where we've got to start playing with. If we're playing the 2018 roadmap game, you're not wrong on this on the face of it, because I seriously doubt any phone company is going to be delivering Tango grade hardware in any significant way. But what we know from ARKit and AR Core, this is something that we're fairly confident Huawei is looking to add to their neural processing chip capabilities in the future, where they're going to, instead of trying to get developers to code things specifically for their separate processing unit, their NPU, they're looking at making the NPU do all the heavy lifting for this AR core style computational processing. So, if you had a triple camera setup, you would at least be able to feed the NPU depth information, which could then, the NPU could do the translation into the software for AR Core. And then you could end up with a nicer overall augmented reality result than if you just had one single camera. I mean, I am completely speculating there, but it would make sense to me that Huawei's position moving forward here would be, how can we feed as much good raw data from imaging sensors into something that can then translate and make sense of that. Especially
Well,
playing with the Mate 10 Pro camera, it is stupid fast at recognizing your subject. This is a functional benefit of having a separate processing unit doing your thinking for you. So you hold up your camera, you look at a flower through your camera, almost instantaneously the phone goes, "Oh, that's a flower." And it's already making adjustments to your image capturing and to what the image processing is going to look like once it's produced the shot for that flower. It's really compelling. So a next gen system, triple camera, fed into an AR core setup, that could be a good step forward for augmented reality.
Well, one bit of je ne sais quoi I always hear from you about the camera product is the green that you put in there that makes it more cinematic or just enhances the mood a little bit. I'm wondering if
Texture.
texture of it. I'm wondering how that might play into things because when it comes, especially to edges, that can get a little bit tricky. And
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, when they want to
it's
play around with that, add it in afterwards and just go for the clearest kind of optics that you can.
it's
I
always
know.
pros and cons. I mean, you're not wrong there. When you shoot full auto on the Mate 10, I think that they've scaled up their noise reduction in a way that can look really plasticky. And you'll see that in if you use the depth of field mode, the bokeh blur background mode on a Huawei. Now that is significantly more processed, but you can really use it in much lower light conditions than you can Apple or Samsung. Uh, it's always going to be a balance and a trade-off, but one of the things that Huawei might be able to benefit from, since I doubt anyone's going to be going to a 2/3 inch or a 1 inch sensor, like we had on the Lumia 1020, a much bigger surface area to soak up light. Instead, having three smaller sensors, if you can combine the output in a meaningful way from all three, you're making up the difference in terms of physics. You are acquiring more light per capture to do that. So again, there's going to be a compromise in how all that's stitched together and how that image data is merged, but there's potential there. And if any company I think can do that in an interesting way, I think it's Huawei right now. I think they're well ahead of the curve on multiple image sensor computational photography.
The onus is on Huawei. And in the meantime, I want to introduce this next topic here by being the fuddy duddy of the group and saying that I don't
Yay!
really watch TV. I don't understand how people don't get into live TV. I understand that they don't have the time for the whole scheduling aspect of it, where this live event happens and you get DVR and whatever the heck. Whereas opposed, actually Netflix has all the content I want.
So cranky
Hulu too.
tools.
It's like, yeah, sure, but I don't know. Like, so I just make no time for TV at all and just watch YouTube clips 2 minutes, 3 minutes
So
a piece, and
you're well
all the
invested in the
memes.
Amazon ecosystem if you're
See
only
all the
watching YouTube,
memes.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Fire
yeah, no,
TV, is that real? Is that really like a thing, as I
it
understand
really
it?
is. No, Amazon's ecosystem is a lot more fleshed out and formidable than I would have guessed. I mean, because we spend so much time digging into smartphones. So in the smartphone ecosystems, it's far more likely that we're going to encounter or need to add Apple TV or Google products into the discussion. So because I'm tasked with reviewing a ton of Android phones, it kind of just makes sense for me to stick with Chromecast, for example, as one
Mhm.
of my primary TV distribution methods. But taking one step outside of our fandom, our bias when it comes to what we need to talk about, Amazon is a really BFD. I am shocked at the adoption of Fire products and Alexa products and how people are genuinely happy with those, which makes stories like this one all the more frustrating when, again, major corporations are playing gotcha with their customers to leverage preferable business solutions from other major corporations. And this isn't a situation of, well, I'm happy Google's doing this because, or I'm upset for Amazon because. I'm pissed with both Google and Amazon because this is a terrible way to use your customer base
This is a
as
stupid
poker chips.
splash. This is a stupid splash fight in a kiddie pool here. And with the, oh hey, you're not selling Nest. Oh hey, you're not doing the whole YouTube interface right so that we can't show ads and whatnot. Like those all those I don't even. I don't. I just don't
Yeah,
because this
it's bad
has
luck.
been
It's a really bad look for two companies that have consumer-facing solutions that people really enjoy, you know?
well, I was about to say too that the Echo Show, like even the Echo Show, which only has tens of thousands of units out, like I think The Verge's Casey Newton had a point in that, or someone out there, pardon me, Casey, but someone out there had a point that the how the Echo Show is putting out YouTube, they're doing it via web interface. They're cheating, really. And at that point, YouTube was like, "No, you're not allowed to do even that," which is kind of all right. So you're blocking access
Mhm.
to like that, and that's part of the terms of for the terms of use.
And
Like what
and
what's
and
the
the really
what's the
cynical
experience that you're breaking here?
Well, and the really cynical part of me too is sort of acknowledging the fact that Google doesn't seem to have any significant designs for YouTube. It's just a place where tons of people go, but they're not really doing a very good job of investing in that infrastructure or finding better ways to monetize that user base. So it's kind of a win-win for Google. Google really does seem to be focused on trying to be a proper competitor to traditional cable broadcast and outlets like Netflix and Hulu. Like everything that we've seen from them that has been a significant step in improving content catalog or distribution has been focused on either YouTube Red or YouTube TV, not traditional YouTube. Traditional YouTube is going through this dearth of monetization problems and community outreach problems, and it's a really bad look. So, because we know a ton of people still traffic YouTube, you can hurt Amazon users by not letting them go there. But even if they don't go there, it's not really terrible because Google is focused on growth in other areas outside of user generated video. So, again, if I'm playing the cynic, it makes me doubly upset with Google on this one because of how they're sort of holding us as hostage or ransom for Amazon to do business the way that Google wants them to. And I'm not entirely thrilled with Amazon right now either, in terms of the sort of global economy that we're looking at. But this is a fight where basically no one wins. All consumers will pretty much lose, regardless of who comes out on top.
Amazon, I mean, their scales are smaller, so I think that gives them somewhat of a pass, whereas Google is pretty much just the internet and
Well, Amazon's distribution content services are smaller, but again, we're watching Amazon leverage brick and mortar again, buying out Whole Foods, and they are a deciding factor for a lot of consumers around the world as to what products they buy, even just what products they have access to. So, given a little time and some leverage, Amazon could make some preferred deals that could also hurt Google's distribution of services. Again, it's all a bad look. And this is
I mean,
also why I feel like not that I feel like the government needs to get involved, but I think that there should be some growing discussion on these mega digital corporations and some kind of examination for consumer protection services or the FTC. I don't
it's gonna be
want
the
to jump
19
right in.
teens again.
Yeah, I don't want to jump right into like saying, oh, we need divestiture or we need to break up the bells with Google and Facebook, but we need to examine these business practices to see if they really are in the consumer's best interest to have a consolidation of power with a very few top players in each industry. This is coming from Peter Hayton on Twitter using the PN Weekly hashtag. It really shouldn't matter which device we invest in to watch these core services because in the end, all this will do is hurt sales for both companies. And
Uh,
we would think so, but we can't really make these companies adjust their business practices if there's no competition. And that's unfortunately where they're
they
the
don't
only
share a
competitor. Yeah, I mean, like the only top competitors are Microsoft isn't really super relevant in this conversation. Facebook
I'm gonna
doesn't.
watch all my content on Vimeo now.
Well, I was gonna say VidMe, but they shut my channel down, so that's no good.
Oh, and
Yeah,
yeah.
they closed up shop too. So again, consumer generated video is in a very very precarious state on the internet. If you're not supporting your favorite producers, it's going to get
Speaking of
ugly over the
consumer
next year.
generated video, um, are you excited?
Am I excited
Are you
about
excited? Are you,
Vine? I don't know that I could physically care less
all
about
right, good.
Vine. I
Moving on.
don't know that it's possible. I am just the fact that I'm aware of someone talking about Vine again has driven me even more negative caring than I thought I could achieve before. So
Link off of the last story here, or the content of the last story, because we've been talking about these content. We are content distributors.
yes, we are.
Talking about, I mean, most of the reason that I directed my rage at Google is because we're on the platform right now, and what better way to poke the eyes than do just do that? But um,
Hmm.
we've seen a lot of these so-called Vine stars migrate over to YouTube when their bread and butter content was 6 seconds long, and they had to really adapt to figure out, okay, are we really going to continue that, or is what will sustain us in this kind of stupid machine that Google that YouTube has become?
Oh, the stupid machine. No, I was 1 year off in calling the demise of Vine. I did there are these like conferences you can go to, and one is called Social Media Week. And I actually taught a
Yeah.
workshop talking about pre-production, and someone like super into the Vine ecosystem was asking me my thoughts on it. And I being honest, I don't think any platform that builds its core service um basically just a single mechanic can be sustainable in the long term. And I think we've seen the same thing with Snapchat. Snapchat still exists through a momentum of very passionate and hardcore diehard users. But every other platform in social has replicated what made Snapchat initially compelling, especially the stories feature. There's even going to be a YouTube version of this, so you can tell your quick, pithy little story videos, share those in YouTube's platform. Like I just recently turned on the community tab on my personal YouTube channel. Like, everyone's already building a story function into their service. So why do you want to go to a solitary distribution platform only to do that one thing? And Vine is the same. If I want to shoot a 6 second video, I have numerous places where I can already share that with an audience that's engaged. Why do I want to yet sign up for yet
You're sure that
another?
your Snapchat and Instagram audiences are really that engaged, or you don't have, as you have the personal profiles of each platform that you have, and then you have the content stuff, and sometimes you have to set up a because you have the fake Insta to kind of, it's, you can toy around with all this stuff. Whereas Vine, you do it for the Vine, and it's just like World Star Hip Hop, where it's like you do it for the fame, and that's all you do. That's all you focus on. You don't just, oh, hey, 6 second video of me talking to my friends, and they start doing that. I feel like this is more conducive to just a agnostic, a friend agnostic social.
Maybe.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you're not wrong. It's just I wonder what the audience capacity will be for following people on differing and smaller and less impactful social networks going into the future. I kind of feel like that Web 3.0 notion of social is already on the decline, and that we're looking for what's going to be the hot new way to interact or engage with the community. But also, we just got a tweet from Andrew Wallace using the PN Weekly hashtag. Doesn't Vine have the same core problem that Snapchat has, where any features that they can make can be easily copied by a competitor with a larger built-in audience? So I'm pretty confident if we got a new Vine, it wouldn't be just the same setup as the old Vine, but a new startup right now trying to play with social and trying to do stuff with media and content distribution. anything they do, if there's any spark of popularity in it, will instantly be ripped off by Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat. You're going to see that immediately carried right into platforms that are already way better staffed, funded, and have much larger user bases.
Well, I mean, there's only so much content that you can share in just 6 seconds. So that pretty much all the profitability that you could bring from big time publishers. And with that, it doesn't make it seem likely that YouTube and Snapchat and all the other built up platforms would be more willing to go back to what Vine once was. So, in terms of if they're not going to expend too much effort on R&D on this, then the big players don't even have to look at this.
Well,
Whereas
I mean,
Vine,
I
I
don't
feel
think
like
that
has
it's a
freedom.
situation of whether or not they want to expend R&D on this. I just don't think they can, unless
Well,
they had like an
whether or
amazing
not,
team of developers working on stuff all this time.
I
You're
mean,
already
it's just this
starting
one
at a
person.
huge net negative.
It's one of the former co-founders of Vine that's using his money to play around right now. So, I mean, if he finds something, then
Yeah,
he'll have
if he
the right.
finds something, his best hope is to build some little popularity and then sell immediately if someone shows
Oh,
any interest in it.
well, Russ Yusupov was all no when that happened, and
Well,
because
and then we saw
oh,
how that all worked
that
out.
Scott Rogowski of HQ, and that was fun.
So we do have a couple tweets that I want to get to before we hit the sponsor break from Peter Hayton. Do you think we really need any more social networks? Vine's first failing says it all, doesn't it? I'm all for competition, but do we really need this? And to a point, I mean, we don't really need any of the sort of social fun features that we've got. I just think anything that's novel will be swallowed up by a bigger player before you can really leverage it to build an audience.
Well, Peter Hayton, I just think you're hating on Vine. That's all I got to say.
Oh, that's a name pun. Burn. And Peter also asked, we saw AR Core brought up on stage with the Mate 10 announcement. Do you think that this presents an opportunity for Huawei to work closely with Google to attempt to position more accurate results from services like Google Lens and support VPS with future Pixels? I don't know how closely. I think Huawei still has. There's just that little bit of distance between Huawei and Google as we look at, especially as we look at like a North American market. But any kind of insight on this, I think Huawei has some really cool tech to leverage that could make the AR core discussion a lot more interesting, especially if Huawei can utilize NPU for AR without having to make other developers support the hardware that you can only find on one line of phones. So that's a really big if, but I see there's a lot of potential for it, and I think that could be something really interesting.
And even as Huawei tries to go beyond its bounds in attaining that number one global shipment spots, in China they're still number one, and you still need back end services to help things out
Mhm.
these days with machine learning. And while there might be something going on behind the scenes, I haven't seen that kind of one popular app that has popped up, or that one popular service that has come out of there yet. So
Well, I
until
bet
Alibaba or Baidu or whatever.
I'll be curious to see if like if we can leverage something. We know like an Ingress 2 is on the horizon, and that
Yeah.
might, if something like that has a true AR core or AR kit component to it, if that helps further the discussion on this. But I want to wrap up just this little section here.
I
This is
just
from
can't wait for the anime.
Yeah, this is from DMB Listener 42. PN Weekly, looking at nations like China when it comes to censorship, why would more government intrusion in America's internet be good? From what I see, excess regulation is the reason why ISPs seem to be monopolistic. So, could more regulations hurt the net? And this is one I do want to comment on just to kind of drift into the net neutrality discussion for just a second, because I see this brought up a lot. And you'll see it brought up a lot under the guise of a discussion like, I don't want the government picking winners and losers. So, first of all, regulation needs to be defined. What are we talking about in terms of regulations? For example, if you do business with T-Mobile, with Verizon, with Sprint, with US Cellular, or any other company other than AT&T proper, well, the only reason you have that competition is because of government involvement when we had monopolistic business practices through Ma and Pa Bell. So that's one aspect. That's one very real, tangible benefit that government intrusion can bring into a market if the market is starting to become stagnant. So when we're talking about net neutrality, we're not talking about regulating content on the internet. That's not a part of the discussion. It's the discussion of net neutrality really hinges on the definition of the internet. Do you consider it to be a telecommunication service, or do you consider it to be an information service? And the reason why this is a difficult conversation is because ISPs now can occupy both. They are responsible for getting you on to the internet, the actual pipes, the on ramps that get you onto the internet, and they fulfill content. They distribute content, information on the internet. So they can blur the lines as to what it is that they're actually doing. The reason this is different than Chinese censorship is because net neutrality really has no design over censoring websites. And it really has almost everything to do with making sure your access to the internet is priced fairly in a way that resembles like water or power or the telephone network. I mean, if you're complaining about landline telephones, that would be a similar complaint to Title II regulation over the
I,
internet.
I guess the simpler, because I hear the term winners and losers and who chooses them, whether it's the government. I know it's the ISPs that do so, because if these regulations are not in place, they might
And
have
the ISPs will
incentive
choose what
to
sites
be
you can
able
go
to
to and how much it'll cost.
choose the levers that do so. And that, in the end, it should be that the traffic, the traffickers, the passengers, the viewers, everyone that is using the internet determine who gets more popular and who gets less. So I
Now,
mean
just
that's
just to just to wrap up, and TMB listener 42, and I really appreciate the way that you phrased this question. To wrap up my feelings on the notion of competition, because obviously a lot of this would be better if every municipality, every community had real choices for who they wanted to do business with. So most markets, you only have one player. In very few markets, you'll have two or three solutions for getting on the internet. And it's only in places where you've got community funded broadband or Google Fiber that you see real competition where ISPs are actually having to compete against a proper 21st century network. So I agree that there is too much regulation which prevents competition. But this is not regulation at the federal level. This is the laws and the zoning issues that companies face at the city and state level, where a major player, a major ISP, can go in, can influence smaller local city and state politicians and get favorable legislation to prevent them having to compete. So a Verizon can go into a town and help them write legislation which prevents competition. So if we're looking at improving the situation for competition, we need to start from the bottom up. If we deregulate the market now from the top down, companies like Verizon and Comcast are already huge winners and are already looking at buying up smaller players. You will have less competition. But the major tenets of net neutrality don't necessarily directly influence competition at the state and city level. So if we gut net neutrality, you will have less competition for content, and it will not address competition for service. And these companies, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, these companies already managed to help the FCC strike down a law that would allow companies to buy up more media outlets. So you will have more merging, more conglomerates, more oligopolies. You will have a chain, a snowball effect, a chain reaction of less competition for service, less competition for content and everyone paying more because there is less competition. If you want to fix competition, you need to start fighting at the local level. You need to start fighting at the state and city level. And if we could get to that point, I feel we could do a better job of fulfilling free market at the federal level and backing off regulations from the FCC. But right now, those regulations at the FCC, Title II, control over the internet, calling it common carrier, is necessary to protect competition of content. And this is why this stuff gets super heady, because all that time I spend explaining it, someone else is going to walk around and go, but I still don't think government should pick winners and losers, and that's bad. And that's all they have to know. And then we've lost the discussion. That person is lost in the discussion. They are a lost cause to try and reach. But it took me all of that time to untangle the issue, to properly explain what's actually happening when we're talking about net neutrality.
Well, I mean, the simpler way that you could say it is government is stopping the ISPs from choosing the winners and losers so that you can choose the winners and losers. But I think that's too simple.
I don't think government should be picking the winners and the losers.
It's the ISPs.
Government is bad.
The ISPs, people.
You should choose for the government to pick.
You can see all of these stories in full detail at pocketnow.com and look for the podcast section to get to this episode's rundown. You can chat with us about what you have been reading up on with hashtag PN Weekly. Also, be sure to check out Jaime Rivera daily on our YouTube channel, even though Jaime Rivera has not been, well, I think he has been. I'm surprised he has the time to be able to do so, since he's attending.
He's got the daily down to a science. I know his mobile setup. He's got the Qualcomm set.
Well, yeah, but the Qualcomm Tech Summit, he's taking up a bunch of his time. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, but first, this sponsor message.
And I'm really excited about this sponsor. This is a new one for us. This is coming from the author James Rollins, and they're promoting the new book, The Demon Crown. From the #1 New York Times bestselling author James Rollins comes the thrilling new novel, The Demon Crown. Often compared to Clive Cussler and Michael Crichton, Rollins combines real science and history with cutting-edge military action. Off the coast of Brazil, a team of scientists discovers a horror like no other. An island where all life has been eradicated, consumed, and possessed by a species beyond imagination. To save mankind's future, the members of Sigma Force must make a devil's bargain and join forces with their most hated enemy, even if it means sacrificing one of their own. It's a great place to join in on the wildly successful Sigma Force series. Rollins' latest Sigma Force novel is one of the best in the series. The mix of science, history, and high-concept adventure is always first-rate in a Rollins novel, says Booklist, and Publishers Weekly calls it bone-chilling. So you can get started. Go check out jamesrollins.com, where not only can you get the full scoop on the Sigma Force series, his entire catalog, his library of novels, he's also got a ton of stuff up there. I went and checked it out before we jumped into the show. He's also got a ton of stuff up, audio clips, video clips, and just other content that you can download surrounding his books and surrounding his stories. It's pretty cool. So once again, go check out jamesrollins.com. Check out The Demon Crown. #1 New York Times bestselling author James Rollins, and we thank him for supporting the Pocketnow Weekly.
Thank you, James. You really make a difference in our lives. All right, let's talk about Qualcomm for a sec, shall we?
Yeah, we probably should.
Yeah, we should. So they had their big tech summit this week, and it was all in advancements of their latest chipset, the Snapdragon 845, obviously successor to the 835. We got all these improved specs. We also had time for a couple of always connected PCs, but we'll get to those in just a second. So if we want to dive into the specs we have, it's 2.8 gigahertz on the 4 power cores, and the 4 efficiency cores is 2.6 gigahertz, and the 4 efficiency cores at 1.8. Blah 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 about GPUs and artificial intelligence, because there's just a whole bunch of integration that they have with the jargon. All right, so I guess down here. So more artificial intelligence in graphics processing thanks to AR, VR, computational they have foveation that is more integrated into the chipset now, which is the processing for your current line of sight while decreasing the processing power needed to produce the rest of the image in your environment. I've been trying to rack my brain about how to explain that, which is hard for me. I can't explain things, which is why am I on this podcast? Hello. We have better color gamut. We have a wider color gamut that can be supported now, the Rec 2020, which is way above DCI P3 that everyone's making a big deal about. X20 LTE, bringing us to 1.2 gigabits per second on an LTE connection. Really love that gigabit LTE term that they are keen on coining, and they have a dedicated secure coprocessor as well, because much more important as we've gone into mobile payments and all these transactional deals just by having the phone in contact with something else. So there's that, and just a whole bunch of other stuffs too. So first impressions on the chip before we move on to the wider picture here.
Well, this is actually just kind of helping us flesh out. We had a discussion on this before, talking about the different aspects of the new chipset and what we hope manufacturers will really take advantage of. It sounds like Qualcomm's on the right. I think they're on the right path with some of the future consumer-facing services, the AI services, these neural learning services, and hopefully what we'll soon see rolling out, fifth generation uh, G 5G networks coming out soon. Sorry, I lost my place in my notes and then tried to dance back and it didn't work at all. But it's also, what I'll be really curious to see is what manufacturers really start taking advantage of some of these benefits. So, for example, the ISP on the Qualcomm 845 can capture 16 megapixel images up to 60 frames per second. So that could technically mean bursts of like 5K video if you wanted to jump in on that. And the same thing, 480 frame per second, 720p video. But do we really think that a Galaxy S9 using a Qualcomm 845 is going to do this when we haven't necessarily seen Samsung, for example, take advantage of everything the 835 could do? And that's where I get a little twitchy. Like, I think Qualcomm's offered up all the right bits. Now it's who's actually going to take advantage of it all, who's really going to produce hardware and software that will make use of all of this cool new tech. Or are we just going to see another year of phone manufacturers kind of coasting on this stuff because it's all good enough? I mean, do you really want better slow motion video? Probably not, even though all of us on the ground are saying, yes, we do want better stuff. And you've got Apple out there doing some really crazy cool things with their own in-house chip development.
I mean, let's not forget that SoC stands for systems, multiple systems on a chip, and that many manufacturers don't even opt to turn a lot of those systems on that are on the current and previous chips. So I mean,
right.
there's this one codec, the aptX HD, which allows you to stream multiple different tracks of music onto different Bluetooth speakers, which, you could DJ a whole house if you wanted to. That'd be cool, without having to have a smart hub or whatever. So, but you have to have the aptX HD codec enabled, and you also have to be working with an 845 work board. So it's these kinds of proprietary things and you have to dig into them. It doesn't, I mean, and manufacturers may not even opt to even look into them anyway. So
yeah, because again, I want to give Qualcomm the thumbs up here. Like I said, I think they're on the pulse. I think these are definitely the types of systems, the type of benefits and features that make a ton of sense when you're looking at where you think the future of consumer computing is going to go. I think Qualcomm's on point, but now we just need to see what actual manufacturers do with this tech once it starts shipping.
And speaking of this tech, this prior tech that we're talking about, the Snapdragon 835, we're seeing it being repurposed for different uses, such as PCs. We're actually seeing the first always connected PCs out with Asus and the Nova Go, and also HP with the MVX2. These are coming out sometime within the next 6 months or so.
Mhm.
And they're coming up with Snapdragon 835s, of course, but always the LTE modem, the X16 LTE, which is on the 835, so that they're able to do connected standby while the device is asleep. Supposedly, they've been hammering home the battery life point because, as we know, cellular operations do take quite a bit of juice to run.
Mhm.
And then there's the rest of the specs, which they're all right. But the interesting part of this is that while what runs full Windows 10,
Well,
the
Windows
experience.
10s, so
Well,
not full
well, I
Windows.
mean,
Yeah.
you can. So that's the thing, is that they're Windows 10s, but users are able to upgrade free to Windows 10 Pro, which comes to the idea. All right, so what kind of experience am I going to get if I do end
Yeah.
up upgrading to Windows 10 Pro? It sounds like that this is the 10s experience, which is more Windows app oriented as opposed to executable files and all the other things. So, I mean, first take on that.
Well, I'd be really curious. I'll be really curious to see, because I mean, we're talking, what is it? 4 gigabytes of RAM, 64 gigabytes of storage for 599, 8 gigabytes of RAM, and 256 gigabytes of storage for 799. 799, ultra low power, a battery life focused mobility player. But I will still be very curious to see how, uh, you know, this chipset supports legacy x86 software. That to me becomes one of those big talking point issues. If the experience is kind of painful, then we're kind of all the way back to where we were with netbooks again, as they're increasingly more expensive. When so much else about this brings some great benefit,
I mean,
having a
they've
low
worked
power
the whole.
LTE connection is huge,
Yeah.
but at 799, am I really getting a mobile road warrior that can handle my IT department's custom software for the Windows environment? Or am I limited to, like it can kind of run this, but it's going to be painful. So you really just want to use apps. And if that's the case, then this is a poor demonstration of what the 845 should be able to deliver.
Well, to be fair, I mean, the whole bridge between ARM 64 and x86 has been in the works for at least a couple of years. We've seen test beds on the Snapdragon 820. That's not to say that we'll get an automatic improvement on the 835 just by having more horsepower to it, but it's just, I mean, you would hope that they got their emulation layer down pat at this point.
Well, I mean, you would hope. I
No
mean,
one
but
is used
like, but again, the thing that makes me nervous is while we would hope we have that emulation down, if we did, why do we still see such significant leverage on an app-based version of Windows 10? Why have Windows 10s if the emulation is good enough just to deliver regular Windows 10? That's why I'm nervous. I'm not saying like they haven't done it. It's just I need to see. I want to see, and I'm apprehensive about apps in their current state, if we're talking about emulation. But one of the other things that they did show off, we should probably talk about this HP Envy, as another
Well, I mean,
example
yeah.
of
So it was the Asus
connected.
Nova Go and the HP Envy X2, which is the. I mean, I guess when we're cutting our expectations, because the Nova Go is a bona fide laptop, even though you can swing it around full 360 degrees. This is the HP Envy X2, which we got fewer details on. It's
Yeah.
more like nebulous product at this point, scheduled for spring launch. But it's a tablet. It's a convertible tablet with a detachable keyboard, and you would hope, we've seen the market mature for this kind of product for a while now. So HP should be able to make a decent keyboard and decent tablet. They've been talking more about the actual body itself and less about the software. And
Yeah.
that's their want. But in terms of just being able to show it off, I feel like Qualcomm should have done a better job of at the event of reminding us just how good it is, and as opposed to an 820. Let's see what happens with an 835. Let's see what happens on this
Yeah.
little updated test bed or on the HP. That would have
But I
been
gotta say, this the shots that HP showing off, I was really happy to see, because I kind of miss the idea of the Surface. You remember there was the Surface Pro, and then there was the regular. It wasn't regular. What did they call that? It was like the
the
Surface.
Surface, just the Surface 3. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just like the Surface 3. So having something in that space, so you would have the Surface laptop, a Surface tablet, and then the Surface Pro, which is a full-fledged computer in a tablet. I kind of like the idea of that. So if HP can pull it off, I think that could be pretty cool. I think that there's room in a market for. I mean, if Apple can put out commercials of kids using the iPad, what's a computer? I feel like Microsoft has room here in this market to also like make a streamlined, lean and mean, maybe more app focused machine, but just so that consumers understand that's what the thing is. And if HP can deliver some really cool hardware, they're touting their relationship with B&O audio, then that could be really cool. I think that could be a good presentation of what a mobile chipset could do for a more a mainstream computing environment.
So they're threading this feature as one of the many ways that it can deliver on output, but the rear-facing camera on this tablet, 13 megapixels, and they're intending this for VR and AR-related programming. Is that going to tilt the edge on anything? Are we going to be able to code? Is there going to be AR apps that we can develop on the tablet? Yeah, I guess that's the question.
I mean, even if there's just some AR consumption on the tablet, that I think could be a positive benefit.
Do you
So,
think that they'll win at this? I know we're talking about wins and losses here, but do you think that would be still
well,
a win?
well, yeah, I think that would still be a win. Right now, I think AR and VR are in danger of becoming the next generation of consumer buzz terms like 3D TV. And until we see compelling hardware, consumer desirable hardware, and services to really take advantage of that hardware, then this stuff there's the danger this stuff withers on the vine while we're all waiting. I'm gonna wait for it to get good and then I'll buy in. That's a bad place to be for new tech right now. No one wants to be first. Everyone's slow playing their consumer releases until they see more adoption, but there's not more adoption because everyone's slow playing their releases. And a move like that where it just becomes ubiquitous that you can easily and affordably build this into, like, I think Apple played the right move the way that they showed off ARKit. There wasn't an AR version of the iPhone. It's just built into the iPhone. You didn't really have a choice. It's there. You can choose not to use it, but developers know that they have an audience that they can reach out to, standardized hardware that they can develop for. This is where we need to go. So to see some of this gain a little bit more traction in Windows land, because think about just like like if we think AR compatible hardware and software is lean in Android land, like there's none in Microsoft land.
Well, doesn't it
So
more
it's kind
like
of
was in Linux? They're for makers, and like the low end, Apple products are for consumers. It just feeds into this narrative of, yeah, this is Windows are for nerds, whereas Apple's for everyone. And VR is kind of just made into that kind of thing. And doesn't that notion make it more imperative that the Snapdragon 835 be able to process developing AR and VR apps?
I don't know that it makes it more necessary, but I don't think you will get any AR apps for a Microsoft environment unless there's hardware that can use it. And they don't have phones. So you need to put that hardware on something. So
Yeah,
that's
I
why I
got
would still consider, like, if HP came out with a tablet, it's running a Windows 10s, or you can do a full Windows 10 on it, but it's got AR capable hardware. That's the first baby step in addressing a glaring hole in Microsoft's HoloLens and VR strategy. They're trying to do this mixed reality thing, which is good, but it's basically just VR plus. It's not going to get us this AR stuff that is going to come to most of the Android ecosystem and all of the future iPhones coming out. And that's a bad place for Microsoft to be, since they showed off the most interesting aspects of AR with HoloLens. Like, they've completely given up this amazing advantage that they could have had in the market, and now they have to play catch up again. And I'm not surprised because it's Microsoft.
Mm. So this is probably the biggest press offensive that I've seen from Qualcomm in promoting one of its chips. They had this huge conference in Hawaii and basically paid for everyone to ship them out there. Mr. Mobile, Michael Fisher was had a top rated or no interview with a top rated top executive for the Snapdragon business, and there's just a whole bunch of buzz and a whole bunch of terms. Again, the gigabit LTE and the SPU with other words that just was the third. The Snapdragon 845 was the third generation AI related or AI driven chip that they have, implying that the A35 and the 820 were designated the first and second gen. But that, I mean, I don't know, is that really like that would be retroactively painting them as focused on AI when they were still trying to recover from a whole bunch of other things, such as overheating, such as the basic operations of a chipset that's supposed to drive mobile applications without catching on fire. So, I mean,
Well, and I think they've got other discussion points below. Did our chipset catch on fire?
pretty much.
But you know, you're not wrong. It's just I kind of feel, you know, I'm sure companies are looking at their products beyond just, do they explode? No. Okay, cool.
No,
Ship
no, no,
them.
no, no, no. I mean, of course, but those were distracting factors
No, they
that kind
were.
of,
You're right.
driven
I
away
just,
the conversation. And with Apple moving off of Qualcomm, they've been having their little spats in court over modems and over power management chips, and
but
with
that it's that right
MediaTek.
there, and that's where I think you're spot on bringing this up like this, is because Qualcomm is trying to build more mind share around their involvement in the mobile industry. I think they're trying to raise their own visibility profile up for two reasons. The first of which we're talking about now in the story, with Apple trying to break away from Qualcomm as much as they can. Power management, radios, antennas, LTE capabilities, going with any other vendor that can potentially fulfill that, as Apple and Qualcomm are still in court. But the second story that also ties into this is the next one that we've got here, is the continued attempts at acquisition from Broadcom. And again, I think if Qualcomm has higher visibility, there's more business mind share and a little bit more consumer mind share, I think they've got a better job playing defense against Broadcom while they're going on offense against Apple.
Well, it's just the fact that Broadcom is sitting still and saying that we're going to stay here at $70 per share, which is their offer, and no more. Where many people who have been holding on to Qualcomm for a long time want at least $80 a share, and this public announcement, they had this campaign on multiple transit systems, on billboards everywhere, that was like, we're the reason why you love taking pictures so much, and all these esoteric kind of things. And every 10.4 seconds this happens. This is why your grandma calls you or something like, and it's just text on gradient or something. And then this is all in a bid to just say there's a reason that we're still around, and that they have over the industry, and kind of the helplessness that they're with Broadcom taking over, whether they get their offer or not. It just it boggles the mind to think that this is kind of a stand of some sort.
Well, it's a roundabout way. I mean, because you summing up all of these sort of shenanigans, it's a roundabout way of saying that Broadcom is kind of making a play at a hostile takeover by setting the pricing on the stock the way that they have, and then by not really negotiating what this acquisition would look like.
Well, the news is
As
that yeah, they're nominating their own board of directors for Qualcomm, and shareholders will get to decide during the next annual shareholders meeting in like March or
Mhm.
April or something. So that's the choice they have right there. But uh, I'm not sure how much this will play into it, and especially with there's also a pending acquisition of Qualcomm taking over NXP Semiconductors for like
Mhm.
$34 billion, and even that's not supposed to make any difference at all. So,
So I think it's just getting back to the original point that you were making as we looked at their continuing shenanigans with Apple and their continuing shenanigans with Broadcom. It makes a lot of sense to me that they would be trying to get out ahead of the discussion, raise their visibility, do more outreach and more involvement with what products and services they actually offer and how that influences the things that consumers buy. So flying a bunch of tech bloggers out to Hawaii for some extra coverage makes a lot of sense from that business perspective. If you want to make the claim that your stock is worth more during this kind of hostile action from Broadcom, you can demonstrate that. Look at the coverage that we got. Look at what people are talking about. Look at how we influence the market. And this is why we're worth more. That to me makes a lot of PR sense. Like that's PR savvy as far as I'm concerned.
mm, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm guessing that the payoff will be when things actually get into motion with integration at the OEM level, and just how many of these features will get put out there, and if these things get really popular in the end. Because smart speakers, they're still going up in the uh, holiday gift guides. They're getting more popular. Wearables less so, although I mean, Apple Watch is kind of its own isolated area.
Mhm.
And we're just wondering where Qualcomm can fit itself into the
The rest of the
specific
market.
narratives of
Yeah,
each device. So
definitely.
that's
So
just my view of it.
So, I mean, you can definitely catch the rest of our coverage on that. And I would also recommend hitting up the Pocketnow Instagram
The
channel
Pocketnow Instagram, yeah. Look
because
at Jaime coverage.
Jaime
Jaime's
had some
coverage.
coverage out in Hawaii. That jerk went to Hawaii.
That
Uh,
that it had to be him.
I want to cover one more viewer comment here live. This is coming from Peter Hayton. Guessing this is relevant now. What do you think of this sudden announcement just after we've seen the launch of the always connected PC, which brings more full Windows apps? And what he's linked to is your story, Jules, about Google killing Chrome apps. So, for those of you who use the Chrome web browser, that you could get these sort of built-in applications. It was sort of, I think it was an attempt at Google's part to make
It
Chrome a mini
wasn't
OS that worked within OS 10 or Windows, and you could use these little applets within your browser. But it looks like that's gonna go away. Um,
these are separate stories, I think, because first of all, Google first announced that Chrome apps were going to die for non-Chrome OS platforms last year. So this was coming. It was just the fact that the App Store actually closed down
right.
just this week. So
We knew
that's
this was coming. It's just the timing on this is lining right up with Microsoft actually trying to make a bigger play for mobility with Windows 10s and partnering with mobile chipset makers.
and with they want to turn the web into more like applets. They're calling
Mhm.
them progressive web apps, and it's not just Google, it's the other browser makers too, and they're just trying to make sure that we've come to use the phone as our main conduits for the internet these days, and they just want it to be a little bit more friendly for mobile beyond what's been provided with HTML5 and like adaptive. There you go.
The only thing that kind of makes me sad is I was really hoping to see back in Windows 8 days, if you loaded the developer preview of Chrome, it was essentially a nearly fully complete version of Chrome OS. And I was kind of hoping to see them continue doing that, especially now that Android apps are becoming compatible with Chromebooks. Because you think about it, like you load the Chrome web browser and you have a nearly perfect emulation space to run Android apps in that space. Could have been a really interesting way to fight Microsoft, a Trojan horse, literally build a Trojan horse for Google services and products right into that operating system. But this is also why I think this is so interesting, is because Microsoft's making this mobility play. Windows 10s does not have the app ecosystem that Android does, and Chrome OS is quickly adopting that. So conceivably, on a Chrome OS notebook, for example, I could use my favorite Microsoft services. I could write my script in Microsoft Word because there's a great app for that. I could do all of my audio recording in what is that? I use Tape Machine is one of the apps that I use in Android. Do all my cutting, splicing, get that all set. Shoot all of the footage from a phone, import it directly into that Chrome OS, into the Chromebook, and then use something like Power Director on my laptop screen to assemble the video, put it all together, output it in 4K, and upload it directly to YouTube. And I'm not entirely sure I could do the same thing in Windows 10s.
That's fair, although you could do the same thing to the T with an Android phone as
Oh yeah, no. I'm what I'm saying is like saying from Microsoft's perspective, Windows 10s brings this streamlined, more efficient. You're not having to support legacy software idea. But at the same time, even though we're losing Chrome apps outside of Chrome OS, Android apps have gotten pretty good. Like I think Apple was too early in calling the iPad Pro a Pro. Like we just didn't have the software. People weren't really utilizing apps to fulfill more mainstream computing program solutions. But we're getting
I mean,
pretty close now with
no, yeah,
mobile
I
app
totally get this.
development
I
filling in
totally
those
get this.
gaps.
Android apps are getting better, which, leads to more of the question of what is the purpose of Chrome apps, because, it's always been questionable that the web-based applets that is kind of full featured and not, and I mean, a lot of these are just glorified redirects to sites with app features, like,
Yeah.
or flash based even, which is kind of and that's
Well,
all that's going to
and
the
progressive
wayside.
web apps could maybe hopefully address that too, where you fire it up in more of a browser type setup, but then it's actually installing a component of what would have been a standalone app. Again, it's I think it's kind of a little fractured right now, but this is one of those I'm actually happy to see Google focusing. Like clean up Chrome, because I've stopped using Chrome. Chrome has kind of become a bit of a mess. Get back to
I
doing
mean,
like making
my
Chrome
thing
what
is
it
that
does really well, and then put that developer talent towards improving other products. So you don't have to keep playing this game of there's Chrome and we've got Chrome apps, and then there's Chrome OS and there are Chrome OS apps, and there's Android and Android like this is too much. Whittle this down and streamline it, and I think everyone's going to be happier.
Android apps are not meant to supplement Chrome apps; they're meant to supplant them, is what I'm saying. That's all.
Yeah, but why? So anyway, I want to thank everybody who joined the
Why?
conversation. Peter Hayton, Andrew Wallace, TMB listeners, some great questions coming in there. So we really appreciate the chatter. I think it's time to wrap this puppy up.
It's weekend, but maybe
Woo-hoo!
when you're listening to it, it might not be the weekend. So it's the
Who
work
knows?
week.
So there you have it, folks. Another episode of the Pocketnow Weekly has come and gone. The show is over, but the conversation continues on Twitter, where Jules is at Point Jules, and I'm humbly at Some Gadget Guy. Pocketnow is around the web: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Google+, YouTube, and our home sites, pocketnow.com for the English speakers and es.pocketnow.com for the Spanish speakers. Shows like this cannot exist without your support. Sharing the weekly with your friends who love mobile technology, and dropping reviews on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and everywhere else podcast reviews can be left. Once again, we want to thank this week's sponsor, author James Rollins. Definitely check out jamesrollins.com. Get a closer look at The Demon Crown. I'm actually tweeting with a friend of the podcast, Andrew Wallace, to see if we want to cover a Sigma Force book on our book review podcast, The Geek Book Club. Stay tuned. We might try and work it into our schedule. But ultimately, there wouldn't be a show on Pocketnow if it weren't for our listeners and subscribers who have kept us on the air since 2012. The Pocketnow Weekly will be back next week with all kinds of delicious technology goodness. So make sure you tune back in.